Hello, this is Heather Roan Robbins, and I'm going to talk to you today about the new year of 2026, an overview of all of the year ahead. Now, I've been an astrologer for over 40 years. I've been working with writing a column called Star Codes every week for the last 30 years, looking at the week ahead, and then seeing what happens. Writing for We Moon Calendar for the year ahead and seeing what happens. So I've been watching these transits carefully. Now, I don't believe that transits, that anything that astrology tells us predicts, and I don't think it's useful to say this is what's going to happen. But we can say these are the emotional energies happening. These are the big metaphysical patterns. How do you want to use them? Because I want them to empower us to use them to the best of our ability, whether we're talking about the politics of our country, the transits of our week, or what's going on in our personal life. Not what's going to happen, but how can we make the best of what's happening? And right now, we know that our country's in a pretty dark and divisive time. I'm going to talk about that in particular. But it's also happening to each one of our own lives. We're in a time of intense personal change, intense cultural change. And if it feels like that, go for it. This year is time to come back and reinvest in your groves, your circles, your affinity groups, your collectives, while still exploring your own unique spark. We don't have to believe that we need to choose between individuality or connection, between our uniqueness and our essential collaboration, or between activism and safety. The planets call us to develop both on this wildly contradictory year. Now, before we begin, let's talk about the solar cycles. The sun is something that we cannot predict astrologically, but has great effect. It's the volume control and all the other aspects. If you've been listening to me, you've heard me talk about this. And it's on a roughly 11-year cycle, but it's not really predictable. When it's quiet, the world is quiet, and we may have a hard time getting political change moving, and people can get a bit more passive, but it can be a very culturally rich time. When the sun is very active, roughly every 11 years, politics is popping like, Mexican jumping beans on a hot griddle, like where everything is moving. We're activated, we're hurt, we're alive, but our immune systems are really strong. The last solar minimum was very long for a solar minimum, and it was during the first Trump administration and as the pandemic hit. And our immune systems were low, the energy was low, and people looked at what was going on, like, not as much change happened the first Trump time in office, and we didn't have as intense reactions to it. We did some, but now the sun is flaring, and it was unexpectedly strong cycle. The sun has been cooking. We've had northern lights visible all the way down into Nebraska and south. We've had, and they're still popping off. The solar cycle, uh, the solar sunspot cycle is about 136 now. That's like how many sunspots are popping. And we're expecting a minor coronal mass ejection today, which will then brush us with a minor solar storm this weekend. Minor solar storm, but we might feel it. People notice that personally, they can feel like the irons are being sheared off and they're just a little extra agitated, sometimes exhausted, sometimes agitated. But notice that all the transits tend to have louder action, louder activity under the solar cycles. We're going to talk about that later when we talk about the Uranus-Pluto trine that's coming up, and the Uranus-Pluto that began with the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the mid-60s as the sun was also flaring at a very high cycle. So this year, last year, we had the beginning and taste of this as Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and Jupiter all changed from inward, and Pluto last year, uh, from inward yin, water, and earth signs to active, outgoing, connected fire and air signs. Now, it's kind of going from inwards to outwards, a lot of action happening on the planetary level and on the interpersonal level and on the political level. Less introspection when those planets happen. So last summer, they all peaked into that place. Pluto is now firmly in Aquarius. Um, and they then retrograded back for the fall. So we've a lot of personal changes that we felt, cultural changes that we felt. Cooking last summer kind of went dormant for the fall. Or we talked about them, but it was hard to get the energy building. We had to go back and review what we've learned for the last 10 years and then begin to take it forward or even more. So this year, there's so many astrological planetary aspects happening as they all move back into those fire air signs. And they're all aspecting each other in the process, that it can be hard to parse them apart. You can't tell just one aspect from the other because it's like tumblers in a lock. And what portal it opens up into, that's up to us. Free will, grace, where we choose to direct this energy. So, but in this process, we see Pluto, which is the slowest of planet. We're going to start with the outer planets in. Pluto, the quietest planet, the farthest out, has moved from Capricorn into Aquarius. It moved solidly last January, and it is going to be there for a couple of decades. And it says, where is the transformation? Pluto gives us a generational quality. Where is the um, and it's moving farther and farther away. Pluto was inside the orbit of Neptune in the 80s and 90s, and then started far out on its 248-year lapse lap. And as it's heading out, it's getting a little quieter. We're seeing less events when Pluto transit hit some more existential gestalt than when it was really hitting us so close to the Earth. But in that process, Pluto says what helps us transform our group dynamics, the support of our community. It's so important to network, find like minds, find people that you want to work with. The dynamics of global connection, of how the world works. How do we feel about the groups we belong to? Pluto in Aquarius at its worst can be group mind, can be mob rule, or a tribalism, or nationalism, where we think that we matter, our group matters, yours does not. The power can be in the groups. The danger can be also in that same place in a misuse of it. So let's take a look at this. We're going to look at first New Year's Day tomorrow morning at 1 a.m. in New York. Moon will be in Gemini, and we see the Sun and Mars and Venus all close together in Capricorn. And during the day tomorrow, Mercury also enters Capricorn. We're going to have a lineup of Capricorn planets, which is, we begin our new year in Capricorn. That's why we make resolutions at this time of year. Capricorn wants a goal. The image of that Capricorn lineup is that mountain goat climbing to the top of the mountain. It wants clear goals, a place to go, or it can get willful and difficult. It wants to feel honorable about its climb, or it can be ruthless. Every planet, every sign, every aspect has a gift side, a practical side, and a challenging aspect. We can use the gift aspect to overcome the challenge, but we have to kind of do it consciously, but we can't choose when we use what. So this lineup of planets in Capricorn asks us to set goals. This first weekend, there's going to be a full moon this weekend. It's going to highlight that energy and say, we feel like there is an opposition between work and competence and success in the world, whether it's for a company or a group or a people, and the right to domestic life, to taking care of the individual, to healthcare, feeding the populace. It can feel like it's a real opposition, but those oppositions are always an illusion. The real answer can be, how do we triangulate and make it a both and rather than an either or? So we may look in our own personal lives. Can your personal life, being happy in your own world, help you build you a good foundation for the work that you plan in this year ahead. Set those goals. It doesn't mean, they help you not as like, did I make it or not to the top of the mountain, but how do I make the decisions at each of the crossroads in my life? Do I want that third piece of cake? Does that in line with my goals? Yes or no. Maybe I take a side route and then I come back and head back up the mountain. But kind of know where those goals are. Um, and if you can notice that pushy ambition, though, and it can feel like driven, is very much a part of the group dynamics that our world is experiencing at the moment. Now, so we see this kind of line up. One of the pieces that we're working on in the long run. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I put these charts up. I put some of them up with all of the information of how to read the planets, the signs, and the aspects. Any of these you can hit print screen and print them off. But with those, for this moment, those aspects, these translation work with the other charts. When I'm going to put up the Constitution, you won't see those, but they're the same ones that you saw on the report to translate this, but it's a little easier to see this pattern. When I'm looking at this chart, and this is the year of the Constitution, we know the Constitution was signed on September 17th, 1787, but we don't know what time of day. They say the morning, so before noon, but they don't say when. They started early morning, they finished in the morning. But it looks like the Constitution has a Sagittarius rising, because the next few hours it would have. Moon in Sagittarius for sure. That Virgo line up here at the top of the chart was involved in the grand trine with Neptune and Pluto. And we're going to see Neptune and Pluto talking to each other again this year in a sextile. And they both trined Jupiter in Gemini at the time, putting in words, not necessarily, we know that the Constitution was roughly put together, but there's magic when we make a vision statement. And I would say that the magic of this is not what they necessarily intend, because often artwork speaks through the individual and creates more power than the flawed human who's creating it can imagine. The muses work. And I think the muses were working during our Constitution, gives us grand trine. But notice that Pluto was in Aquarius, conjunct Saturn at the time, as part of that grand trine. And Pluto was at 14 degrees of Aquarius. Pluto is now at 2, and it's going to be a while. It's going to be 2033 when Pluto comes back to where it was exactly at the Constitution, when the Constitution was built. Now, we saw when Pluto came back to where it was in the American chart, January 6th, right as Trump should have been getting out of office. That during that time, our country was in a Pluto return. Pluto takes that long to go around. It was our very first Pluto return. So we're going to be watching this change. This is for the aspects here are for the chart of the Constitution, the progressions for that chart, and for the transits as the year begins. We're going to be seeing it's tested. I think it comes out renewed by within the next 10 years, but watch it be tested and tried over and over again. We're going to take a look now. So we're going to keep an eye on that chart, that in the long range with Pluto return to that. What is our vision statement? What are the right use of our words and our belief? Pluto was in Capricorn during the American Revolution. Then it went into Aquarius, where it is now and where it will be for the next couple of decades, when we were trying to imagine how a country could work together. And we're back there. So this January 6th, we have a beautiful aspect that happens once every 9.5 months where the Sun and Venus conjunct. And forming a new Venus star point. Ariel Gutman's work on the Venus star point is spectacular if you ever want to look it up. And we talk about how that conjunction begins a new cycle. Now, every conjunction of a planet begins a new cycle. The Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the mid-60s began a new cycle that we're going to be feeling a chapter of this year, but that it begins a new cycle like a new moon begins a new cycle every month when the sun and the moon come together. So the Venus star point, we're just leaving the Aries Venus star point, which kept emotions kind of hot and for the last 9.5 months, now into Capricorn, which can be both businesslike but also ambitious. It can be, it wants to be honorable at the highest note. Capricorn has deep sense of honor. At its lowest note, it has deep sense of ruthlessness. So they're going to conjunct in Capricorn this January 6th, and it might be helpful for you to look. They're going to be opposing Jupiter in Cancer. It might be helpful for you to look in your chart. Where do you have those mid-Capricorn planets? What house does that fall in your life? Where can you do some intense homework to feel like you are in control, not of others, because that's one of the questions with Capricorn. Are you deeply in control of your own life? Are you trying to control others to make that work? So keep that in mind, work with that. How do I feel more competent, more in control, less anxious, more empowered? In what house do you find in your natal chart those 3 planets in Capricorn? If you don't know your chart, go to astro.com and you can get a free copy, or talk to your friendly local astrologers. So that sense of determination. Now, Capricorn, and I've brought this metaphor up a couple of times, but Capricorn is based on the image of a mergoat. Sea creature with a mountain goat front, like a mermaid, only a mergoat. The tail points to the fact that we need to go down and get a dream in our collective ocean, to have a vision, to have our own vision statement. Where do we want to take this? And then be willing to climb. And we think of Martin Luther King and Mao Zedong, both known for long marches, the willingness to walk their dream to the top of the mountain. Very different outcomes, very different reasoning, but the willingness to put the work towards a goal and a vision. Now, what we see out here in Montana, where I live, that mountain goats walking on flat terrain look kind of silly. There's nothing more graceful going up and down a mountain. Without a goal, we can get depressed this month. The goal may be clearing out a drawer, or it might be, putting in a proposal, or doing some minor thing that will take you to a medium goal, which can take you to a larger goal. But that sense, if you find yourself depressed this month, give yourself small, doable goals that you can congratulate yourself. If you are worried about what's going on in the bigger picture, how do you take it small, medium, and large and take it out there? So we see that pattern here for the Constitution. Then there is an interesting aspect. So Saturn, both Saturn and Neptune are going back into Aries. And so we're starting off with that geomagnetic storm, Pluto in Aquarius. Neptune starts back, is in Pisces as the year begins, both Saturn and Neptune. But on January 6th, Neptune enters Aries and Saturn follows soon afterwards. Now, Saturn and Neptune in Aries is really tricky. It can give us more energy. Anytime a planet goes from the last sign of this year of the zodiac, Pisces, which is introspective and thoughtful and turned inward, but can be a little less dominating or confident, but it's got the ability to vision and feel and empathize. Into Aries, you have each sign tends to be the cure of the extremes of the sign before it. So Aries wants to get things done, wants it's simple, wants it's direct, wants action, and can be straightforward, shoot from the hip, clear. But it can lose some of that subtle compassion, seeing the grays, the empathy, but also the tendency for illusion of Neptune and Pisces, where it's been. Neptune talks about what our spiritual path is, and it also talks about what our challenges, what our addictions can be. Neptune in Pisces for the last, 14, 15 years has been, really looking back at spiritual in a good sense. It's been reconnecting for spirituality and intuition for many people. It's brought up the question about water and water rights and too much water, too little water. What's happening with the water? What's melting? What's not melting? Um, Neptune was in Pisces, 160 some years ago, in during the beginning of the spiritualist movement, when the spiritualist church, talking to ghosts, was the fifth largest religion in America, and it's really had a resurgence during the Neptune and Pisces. But so has the illusion, the sense that we don't know where reality is. And one of the key pieces about moving into this next phase is, can we find the technology to sort out what is real, what is not? What is fact? What is propaganda? What is our illusion? How how is AI fitting into this? Now that's one of the things that we're watching with Pluto into Aquarius, Uranus heading into Gemini, the change of technology, Neptune into Aries, is the change in technology. We're seeing AI transforming so many fields. And it won't be just whether or not we use AI or know how to use it. Do we know when it's been used so we know what can be more concrete reality? And how is it changing the ecological systems because of the huge amounts of water and energy they're taking, and the jobs, which are the whole job fields of jobs have been in transformation. In the Rust Belt era, when we started shipping many manufacturing jobs overseas and started manufacturing with less big hunky things, uh, changed how industry, and it tanked employment in the Midwest and in the South. This one is hitting artists, writers, um, video production, computing, fraud research. A lot of tech jobs are going to be transformed and suddenly lost. And we have to figure out, it's going to be like the Rust Belt, only it's going to be the Techno Belt. What do we do with this? How do we re envision it so we really value human work? How we really value our interrelationship, our communities, our social support networks that help one another when uh, the work vision is changing radically. So I think the how that's going to hit. We got a taste of it last year. I think how it's going to where it's going to take us becomes clear, or starts to become clearer this year. It's going to that these aspects are going to be in place for the next couple of years. So Neptune entered Aries last time in 1861, just as the American Civil War began. It was also right before the explosion of the biggest volcanic explosion in the history of Africa. It's an explosive time. Now, Neptune isn't so action oriented, it's what we value. Neptune went into Aries in 1533 as Henry married Anne Boleyn and had her beheaded. Just as an English naval power rose, we think of, and the Henry was declared the chief of life on earth, chief of the supreme head of the Church of England. How did that happen? Pizarro conquered. We also see both in 1533 and 1697. This next time Neptune went into Aries, conquest and conquering. Of course, you can look back at any point in history and you'll see that, but there seems to be that the idea is do we value as a spiritual and as an ideal. Now, it was interesting that Neptune was in Libra, valuing peace just as World War II hit in 1942. That we valued peace, but how do we get there? We valued fairness, but how do we get there? Considering what was going down right before that. So we see this uh, this this valuing potentially warfare, conflict, but also directness, action, and the individual spark. So Pluto in Aquarius wants the group spark. Neptune in Aries encourages us to have the personal spark to make it happen. And so we see on February 26th, 20th, and it'll be on and off this year, Saturn and Neptune exactly conjunct at 0 Aries. So look where you have 0 Aries in your chart. Now, Saturn and Neptune came together in the mid 80s as the Berlin Wall dissolved, and you think of that image. Saturn is a wall, it's hard structure, bones, teeth, personal authority, walls, traditions, systems. Neptune dissolves and re-envisions. So Saturn, it dissolved the Berlin Wall. We also saw the Exxon Valdez, which is oil on water, Neptune on Neptune, hit a rock and break open and change all the regulations on how oil was transported. So watch that shift this year as Saturn conjuncts Neptune. It can really challenge our spiritual beliefs or the feeling that prayer will solve everything. Now, prayer can be very powerful under this combination, but it has to come with action, especially in Aries, that action is being demanded. And we see that move forward, and but it also kind of brings up, what do we believe? It can bring a crisis of faith, or it can ask you to do spiritual practice. Now, one of the things that I worry about is last summer we saw the beginning of it when these planets go into Aries, performative Aries versus real Aries. Real Aries is being a hero, standing up for the underdog, speaking the truth. Performative Aries is machismo, disrespect for vulnerability and compassion. And it's kind of performative machismo rather than real kind of showing up in heroic form. So it also, I suspect, will bring wild weather patterns. But we may see some really valiant rescuers of the truly vulnerable. I think that's the best of that Saturn, Neptune, Aries. We can call for it. We may see a real fight over what is the vision and what do we do about process. We know that. Now, on April 25th, Uranus had dipped into Gemini last year, went back, and it comes back to conjunct Venus. It enters, and it's about 8 years in a sign. It's going to be in Gemini, verbal, communicative, high-tech Gemini. And I think it's going to really change how we communicate and how we transport. I think we'll see more about, how tech is affecting cars, transportation, communication. Hopefully, and we're going to push for that it brings new clarity on what, certainly on how AI works, but on how do we tell what is AI, what is not, what is real, and how do we value things that humans actually make. So watch that, Uranus. Because it changes how we see. Watch also, it may also ask us to look for ways of communicating. Uranus, Gemini, communication, change. Uranus is the planet. Remember, all the planets spin in one direction except Venus, which spins slowly backwards, and Uranus, which appears to spin backwards and sideways. It's at a different tilt than all the other planets. So I always think of Uranus as like the cosmic clutch. It changes gears, and it talks about, and now for something completely different. That Monty Python phrase. It wants to shift the situation, and it can make us feel very urgent in the process. And it's affecting how we communicate and how we transport. As Uranus goes into Gemini, I think it will change tech, but I also think it's going to shift how do we get our information? How do we hear what's really going on, not through government-controlled communication systems? But as we let go of the supervised forms of communication, try to get the word in other forms, and you're going to see, I think, Colbert and crew forming a new way of getting the news out. And I think we're going to see different ways of getting our word out. And how we perceive news has been changing radically. But to do that, also all the backdoor crazy ideas that will flood through in the process. How do we begin to, vet, really check every fact that comes to us, assume nothing, especially as Saturn conjuncts Neptune is helping us restrict or put some controls around the illusions that we've got, to consider all possibilities, but believe nothing until it's proven. I think of like putting everything on your front porch. Bring it in, consider the possibilities, but don't take it in the door and think of it as true until you've vetted it yourself. So we watch that process continuing. At the same time, there'll be a Saturn-Mars conjunction, which happens, a couple times every other year, but that all line up in Aries can be a pretty feisty spring where there's action going. When Saturn and Mars together, it's pretty powerful. Both of them, Saturn will be in a weaker place, Mars stronger because it's in its own sign, conjunct Mercury, and they will be squaring Jupiter just as this begins. Expect that the kind of willfulness of that spring revolution, that revolutionary energy that comes every time the sun goes out of Pisces and into Aries, and that it's as revolutionary as bulbs breaking through the earth and coming alive. But with Saturn wants to restrain and grow up, Mars can be what acts out the young buck. Now, they were recently square right before Christmas. And I talked about, when Saturn and Mars square, you often get a view of what's going on between the generations. Saturn and Mars were squared the week that Rob Reiner was killed by his son. So was a famous opera singer, Jubilant something or other, last name I can't remember, but he's fabulous. Opera singer in California was killed by his son, also psychiatrically disturbed. And the father and son team shot up the beach in Australia. So there's interesting dynamics around the old buck and the young buck. Most of us were fine. Most of us may have felt like, oh, I have to restrain myself a little. I can't do what I want because I've got responsibilities. Or how can I, the question when you put them together is, how can I responsibly do what I want? How can I have safety and willpower and vision and movement in my life? With the conjunct often means there's a resolution about that. We put them together, and that when we can put our craft, our work, our responsibility, and our willpower and our vision and our spring re-engagement together, there's not much we can't do. But that will be a little difficult in relationships. And I'm going to say to keep an eye on all relationships this spring. Venus will be conjunct Uranus, will be conjunct Venus together, which can mean a change of heart. And that can mean the feeling that, as spring fever hits, that the grass is greener on the other side and everybody looks interesting. And it is a time to, if you are looking for new people and new ways of connecting and new life force in your social network, go out there and find out what's happening. Go and start something and invite people. That lineup in Aries will say people don't want to give up what they want to do individually for security or for safety. So if people have been avoiding being honest about what they really want in relationship, it could be an explosive time. But if people are empowering each other to go find themselves and holding hands while they go exploring and exploring together and honoring the spark within, it can be coming alive again together. So just watch that you don't try to control someone out of their life force this spring, because it won't do you any good. So we have the next piece on that I wanted to bring up. After that, this summer is going to be an interesting time. So we know that all the planets are moving forward, and they're Jupiter enters Leo June 29th, and and when Jupiter enters Leo, Jupiter's what expands us. It's bigger than all the other planets put together, right? So it's what opens our world, what expands us, what takes us out. And Jupiter in Leo is going to take us out and encourage us to it could be good for street theater, could be good for drama, it could be good for expressing ourselves, but it will bring panache and activism to the art world, and panache and art to our protests and our street theater. So it's going to be interesting watching all that happens. But then all these planets resonate off one another through this wild summer. Pluto at 4 degrees Aquarius, Neptune at 4, Uranus at 4, Jupiter at 4 Leo. Look at this. 4 degrees of Aquarius, 4 degrees Leo, 4 degrees Aries, and 4 degrees Aquarius. Now, the trines and sextiles open doors. They don't kick us out. They don't insist. They ask us to open up. And if they can, but with the other side of that is, they offer opportunities. It's like any open door. They're like, here's what's exciting. Here's what's juicy. Do you want to take up, or do you want to just sit back and tell other people what they should do? But the Jupiter opposed Pluto is an opposition, and oppositions kind of highlight, it can freedom versus control. Jupiter wants to be free and expand. It can expand the Pluto and misuse of power, or it can empower us to really take our space. So watch what happens this summer, all the possibilities. It will be more about what's on deck for the, what are the titles, what are the names, what are the possibilities this summer. But it's a real wild card time. It's good for us to stay listening to what's going on, how we can help, how we can change things. Now, Pluto is retrograde, Neptune's retrograde, Mercury's retrograde at this time in July 22nd. So it's going to come in and out of focus as they retrograde back, then move back into place all this year. The next piece I want to look at is, it's just going to be a messy evolutionary cycle. Jupiter sextiles Uranus exactly and can inspire innovation. And Jupiter net Uranus aspects often correlate with, they were conjunct when the internet went on. They correlate with steps in technological advancements. But the Uranus trines Pluto July 17th, November 19th, and on again 3 more times before the fall of 2027. Now, the last time they trined on a closing trine, and that means they formed. This is an opening trine because they conjunct in this cycle began in 1965 when they conjunct. They're going to hit the trine again this summer, and that's an opening trine. The last trine was a closing trine in the jazz age of 1920 to 21. It brought a big economic boom. It brought women's suffrage to America, but as a result of years of protest and work, but that was a trigger to make that happen. And we're going to see that potential for possibilities for, opening for economic boom or economic progress as a result of social progress that will not be, we're being tested again. We're back to the place of we have to argue about, women's rights. It's just ridiculous that we're back here, but it will take us back. This cycle began in this particular Pluto-Uranus cycle began with a conjunction in 1965 with a very active sun. And it was cooking. Let me see if I've got that chart. I think I do. Did I put one up for 1965? Maybe I didn't. Oh, sorry. Anyway, in 1965, they conjunct Uranus and Pluto in Virgo, opposed Saturn, and sextile to Neptune. So the same three planets of change: Pluto, death and rebirth; Uranus, the clutch; Neptune, dissolving and revisioning, have such different cycles that only rarely do they ring each other at the same time. Mid-60s and this year. And it's asking us to, so all year long, you've got Pluto, trine Uranus, sextile Neptune, which forms what we call a little grand trine, two sextiles to a trine. And they squared off in 2012 to 2015 when we got the Right to Marry Act in place, and so much social change was cooking, but it never quite took off the way we'd hoped it to. Just as Obama came into office, the sun got very quiet. And instead of peaking the way it was like starting to escalate just as he came into office, and it didn't escalate the way we thought it would. It then got at a little peak and then got quiet. And so a lot of that change kind of almost took off and didn't get the power behind it we'd hoped, but it put in place some good ideas for the next phase. And so we're going to see some of that what started in the mid-60s, what started in 2012 to 2015, really get a chance to build up some steam. And Neptune, that Neptune-Pluto cycle, and is interesting. It's going to be sextiling Pluto July 25th through 2028, on and off, as it did in the mid-50s, the mid-70s, the mid-80s. It's a slow background, thoughtful transit that paints pictures of optimism with the potential for magical thinking. It inspires our spiritual search, but also can bring power plays around religion. So notice that aspect. See if you can help kind of tap into that as a reserve of potential for change. When Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune are involved in these patterns, trying to hold on to the past doesn't work. It's like trying to hold on to the train station when the train pulls out. But we can use the wisdom from where we've come and direct the train in a good direction. So as how to kind of like, what do we need to keep learning from the past to create a new future? And it may be a tricky time for all of us. So I want to move on, because it's going to be a wild year, to the transits for at midterm elections this fall. Now, Pluto will be back to 3 degrees of Aquarius. Pluto will, and Jupiter and Mars will be in Leo, so it's going to be a loud, bombastic time before the election. We see the Saturn will be at 9 degrees of Aries, Jupiter at 2, and Uranus back at 4 in that tight trine. I don't think it's, possible to predict, but it sure looks like change is in the process. Now, I want to take this back to the American chart, and I use the Sibley chart. That's July 4th, 1776 at 5:15 p.m. in Philadelphia. It's the mythic chart of America. There are many different charts that you can use for the history of America, but this one I see ever since the transits for 9/11 were so intense, as Pluto was on the ascendant and Saturn was opposite that. I see so many of the big events to our country occur with this chart, so I use it as a trigger as the map for the charts of the mythic America and what's going on behind it. There may be different charts for different levels of it, but watch this one work. So in a chart here, progressions on the second ring out and where the planets will be on the election day. We're heading back into a Uranus return. Now, Uranus return hits at 84 years for a human, and it's often a chance, like if I want to leave, I could leave, but if I stay, I'm re-envisioned. Uranus transits, we feel those every roughly 22 years. Uranus opposes Uranus at our midlife crisis in our 42, and then it squares, it's like 21, 20, just past the second Saturn square. We feel like I'm going to do all these things with my life. And then you have to go through your Saturn cycles. Uranus comes back to oppose Uranus when we're 42 to our natal chart. And it's that cycle of I want to make sure that I revive all my dreams and make sure that I'm on track. And if I'm not, do I still want that red sports car that I wanted when I was 21? Yes, no. Do I, who do I want to be with? How do I want to be? What are my goals? Do I still need to climb Mount Kilimanjaro? What are, really kind of bringing out all the old dreams, fluffing them off, looking at them, reassessing them, and course correcting. Either coming back alive and doing what we really came here to do, or letting go of those old dreams and setting new goals. Uranus squares Uranus, in our early 60s, and it's time to retire. And we are letting go of one cycle, and we're looking at what are my goals for this next season of my life. Uranus comes back to Uranus at 84, roughly 83 to 85, and says, "Do you want to? You want to re-up?" It's fairly not easy time, but it's a time when many people are asked. Their body says, "Do you want to stay or not?" Or do we need to recycle? Do we need to go another round? Uh, and some people don't. My father, the last pope, the 84 is a fairly easy year to check out. Um, and but if we make it past that, if we say, no, I have things I still want to get done, then the cycle, we go back to and we review like, okay, what are my new, what new excitement, what new changes do I want to make and to use this next phase of my life the best. So America's going to be going through that this year. And it's heading into the all year. It's going to go, Uranus is coming up to it, backing off, going back and forth through 2026 and 2027. What's exciting about our change? Because we have Uranus on our descendant. Remember, when we look at a chart, this is where the sun would be at sunrise, noon, sunset, and the middle of the night. We think that the Constitution was signed late in the afternoon, so there's the sun setting, but not set yet. The Uranus is on this point. This is how you enter the world. This is how other people enter your world. And we have Mars and Uranus on either side of our 7th house cusp. Uranus will be moving into our 7th house, changing how we relate to people, who we relate to other countries, other situations, how we relate to marriage, how we relate to partnerships of all kinds and trade. That will going to be interesting as that heads into there in the next couple of years. I have hopes for it. We went through a progressed lunar new moon as a roughly a 30-year cycle in Pisces, kind of at the bottom of the chart in about 2.5 years ago. And that was one of the quietest times. Although all good things were happening under Biden, many good things, there was, we're beginning to step off the world visibility, quieting down our actions. Our progressed moon went into Aries 28 months ago, and that fire, that kind of like the feistiness has been back in our country since then. 2 months after the election next fall, the progressed moon will be in Taurus, a little less than 2 months, and asking us to get, what can now, we've had all these disruptions, we've had all this revolution. What now can give us more security and safety and stability than we've had? That Saturn-Neptune conjunction is sitting right on the IC, right on the bottom. If you're standing if you could stand when you're born, but you couldn't because you just born, and drop a line through you, through the center of the earth and out the other side, your taproot, that's the IC, the bottom, the rooting point of your chart. It's like your tailbone extended, and how how you absorb information from the world and how it pours into you and into your life. That Saturn Neptune, this, like, we have to reconceive our vision statement for our country, is sitting right on the bottom of the chart this year, and it will be exact this, when they conjunct in February, and we'll be very close to that. We right in the third house, and then they straddle this, asking us to really think about our roots, really think about our vision statement, and how do we move on from here. But I have hopes. I do. It's going to be another 8 years before our progressed sun goes into Aries. And that's a chance to kind of bring our energy back. If the world has decided that war is how it's going to uh, produce these changes, in 8 years, when our progressed sun goes into Aries, we amp up again like we did during World War II and become a leader based on our military energy. I am hoping we can reinvent it and do it another way, that we can be a hero, that we can be kind of revive ourselves in a different, clearer mindset that is that comes back to our original desire to really help and nurture one another and the world around us, which is in our natural natal chart. So, uh, looking at that clearly, we were uh, when we were born, Pluto, which can often mean where the power is in a country, is in the second house of finances. Pluto return brings up the oligarchs, the idea that money, finances, business is where the power is. And that's been true since our Pluto return. Pluto moving on into Aquarius is coming up to our south node, but we believe in the power of the people. How can we use that instead of the power of the money? And that, do they have to be opposites, or can they work together? So I have hopes. Coming back to today, just quickly for tonight, with remember that with Mercury opposed Neptune, dream big. Imagine what could be. Enjoy how this world is unfolding. But be careful about weather-related problems and drinking too much. Saturn and Mercury square Neptune can mean that our thinking or our transportation or our movement or our communication is challenged by Neptune, and that could be, it's challenged. It could mean our fears are challenged by our faith, which is great, our hope, but it can also mean that our driving and our communication is challenged by alcohol or bad weather. So pay attention to that, take care of it, work with that best you can, and enjoy the visionary aspect of it. And notice that this winter, this particular gap time, you may need extra time curled up with a good book or allowing your imagination to wander into better places, and to really use that with great love and respect and care. And uh, this is Heather Roan Robbins. I'm signing off. I hope you a have a wonderful New Year's and a really interesting, healthy, exciting, empowered 2026.